Hello, and welcome to part 2 of Learning Centers. For this presentation, we're going to go over some examples, both some skeleton examples that you could kind of plop into your own classroom, regardless of content, really. And then I'm going to give an example from my Ed Professions class, just so you could see how I might use this in my classroom besides in my English class. So we're going to start with one example of a skeleton station idea. And we have 4 stations here, so we would be using the grocery store line method, where we would make 2 of each of these stations and divide the class in half then. And if you look, you see that there are parts underlined. Well, this is our focus, which we talked about station focus in the last presentation. So our station 1 is going to focus on vocabulary review or study. Station 2 is going to focus on teacher peer feedback. Station 3 is discussion writing, and Station 4 is group reading. Remember too that we're going to try to figure out for each station what the work arrangement is. So are they working in whole group, in partners, in individuals, or with the teacher? Some of these lend themselves better to the other. Obviously, Station 2, if we're doing teacher feedback, then the work arrangement is with the teacher. But if it's peer feedback, then it might be partner. So it just depends on how you decide to kind of plop this into your classroom. So in Station 1, the students would quiz each other or the whole group. So they're partnered up and they're quizzing each other, or they're quizzing the whole group. And this can be done online. So this group of stations also lends itself to blended learning. You can decide which stations you want to do kind of the old-fashioned way and which stations you want to do with technology. So this one could be, the vocab part of this could be a quizzes, a Kahoot, something where students are practicing their vocab skills. Station 2, like we said, could be teacher or peer feedback. So the teacher can work in the small group with the small group on, maybe I have them arranged so that they're all maybe lacking in the same skill. So I can just focus on that one skill, or maybe I'm hitting each student individually within the small group. If it's peer feedback, then like I said, they probably are doing this in partners then, and like grading each other's papers or giving feedback on an assignment that was given to them via a Google slide or presentation or whatever was assigned to them. And they can give each other feedback as well. Station 3 can be a discussion and then writing. So a lot of times when you're doing a discussion station, you're going to use the round robin approach. They round robin a question, and then they kind of summarize what the discussion was about, or they do a claim, evidence, and reasoning response to the discussion that they have talked about. So you're getting both they're getting to talk to each other and then also the writing all in one station. And then Station 4 is a group reading where they can read and annotate text together. So you could have them share a group Google Doc. I would probably ask them to set that up before they got into their stations and have one student share that doc with their other group members. And they could, read the document aloud and annotate however you ask them to annotate. And they could all be doing it on the same Google Doc. So this is just one example of a skeleton set of stations that you could use in your classroom. Another way that you can do this is you can have everything be online or tech. And so one station, maybe the students are close reading using Common Lit. The next one, maybe they're doing an Edpuzzle. Again, you can decide the work arrangement. Are they doing this as a group? Are they doing it in partners or as individuals? The next station, they could be doing like a Quizlet or quizzes or Kahoot or something. And they must do that 3 times, and then they can screenshot their score and send it to you. And then the last station could be a Flipgrid. Again, it could be a partner Flipgrid, it could be a group Flipgrid, or an individual Flipgrid. But this one is all online. Now, one thing people always notice when we do stations that are online is they are carrying their Chromebooks with them. And they quickly realize that, hey, I don't really need to move between stations. But we do want them to move between stations because, again, remember, it's important to get the blood flowing, get the kids up and moving, and that will increase their engagement and it gives them some variety. So even though technically they would not have to move to do the stations, we do want them to still be moving because that's going to kind of reinvigorate them each time they get up to move to the next spot. You can also have students, you can set up more stations and give students options of what stations they go to. You don't always have to come up with the groups ahead of time, and you don't always have to make sure the students go through each station. So I a lot of times will do a writing kind of writer's workshop stations with students. And one station is sentence fragments and run-ons. Another one is labeling parts of a partner's essay. Another one is reading their essay aloud on Flipgrid and watching it and listening to themselves read an essay aloud. They can meet with me. They can work on citations. They can discuss their strengths and weaknesses and set goals, or they can grade practice essays. And you can give students choice. I could also create these so that they have to go through all of them, but I sometimes like to give them choices, and they can look at their rubric from their, let's say, practice PBA and see what they were weak on. And maybe their sentence fluency or variety is not great. So maybe they need to go to station 1 and work on their sentence fragments and run-ons. And they can know that about themselves and go to that station. And they're kind of setting the priority and letting them meet their own needs, which also helps motivation when we give students choice like that. So another example, again, is that you can have a variety of stations and let students choose where they go within the stations. Now, you also have to be mindful of the discipline and the management when you're doing this, and really be watching kids and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. However, if they have choice, a lot of times, again, that's more motivating and engaging for them. They will make the right choices when they're in there. So I teach Ed Professions, and one of the things I do is Bloom's Taxonomy and Objectives. And so I have for the last few years done stations on Bloom's Taxonomy and Objectives. And so this is just an example of, so this isn't necessarily a skeleton one that you could throw into your classroom, but this kind of does give you an idea of what stations might look like within a classroom. So this one's a 5-station rotation. And as I mentioned in the last video, this one does take me 2 days because, again, Bloom's Taxonomy and Objectives tend to be difficult for students to kind of comprehend and wrap their minds around. So I do give them a little bit more time on this. On the first one, they're actually looking for sample objectives. Teachers post their objectives online all the time. So I have them kind of scour through Google together in their groups, and they come up with 3 group objectives. And then within that objective, they're going to identify the blooms, what level of blooms it is. At another station, I let them draw their own representation of Bloom taxonomy. So they can look at the examples that are aligned. There's tons of them, but then they are kind of create their own drawing that gives it meaning to themselves. For station 3, they're going to answer some questions that I've given them. They're going to do this in partners, and they're going to discuss it. And they can use Google to answer the questions if them and their partners don't know. A lot of times their partners already know because I've given them lecture on it, so they know the answers to it. But they discuss those answers first, and then they're writing their answers. For station 4, they're given a handout, and they have to try to come up with activities that coincide with the different levels of blooms. So activities they can have their students do that will coincide with those different levels. And then for station 5, they're going to do that group reading of an article and just have some more discussion. Why is it important to use blooms when planning a lesson? And they will summarize discussion. So most of these, the students will actually turn in online on Classroom. So that's why I wanted to give you this example so that you could see how I assign it. I still have directions at each station on paper. I still go over the directions before we begin for each station, ask them for questions they may have, have them give me the directions back. But then they're mainly going to turn in their information, except for Station 2, online for me. So I set that up within Classroom as essentially a playlist. So I create one assignment under the topic. So this is my lesson plan unit. One assignment under the lesson plan unit is the Bloom stations. And then every station that they need to type or write something, I assign it to them under that assignment. And I make it so that they can type on that. So I make a copy for each student, and that way they are still have to type up each thing at each station. They're still responsible for making sure that they get their work done, and then they can submit all of that at the end. So that is typically how I have my students turn in the work. I think I mentioned in the first video, sometimes I use folders and they turn it in at the station. But if they're doing anything online, most of the time I'll have that set up beforehand, kind of as a playlist on Classroom. So this is what that would look like for you. So all the papers are right there on Classroom. I don't have all these different papers hanging out within the stations within my classroom. So here's just a list if you're trying to think about like, okay, I like this idea of stations, but what do I do? How can I think of the focus? Think of the focus, and then what activities can I do on that focus? So again, you can have activities focused just on vocabulary. That can be quizzes, Kahoot, Quizlet, anything that you might use online, or it could just be old-fashioned. You can make them make their own flashcards, or it can be some kind of vocab assignment that you have had students do in the past. That can just be one of the stations. You can do Google Form quizzes as a station, foldables. You can have them go on a web quest at a station. They can do brainstorming or mind maps. They can have graphic organizers that they make or diagrams of something. They can listen to a recording or a podcast if it's short, and then react to that podcast or recording. You can do flashcards. I like to use the Frayer model on that when I do flashcards. There's peer tutor or teacher discussion and intervention. They could write questions to an author after they read something. There's lots of different varieties of things that you can do for stations. Just get creative and make sure that each station is a little different so that the students are getting the variety that will engage and motivate them. Hope this helps. Hope you can figure out a couple stations that you can use in your own classroom. Thanks, guys.